Good morning and welcome to this week's Midweek Mini. As you've heard, tornadoes caused devastation across 4 states, or at least 4 states, last weekend. Many people lost their lives and even more are suffering from property damage. The storms did travel to South Carolina, but fortunately we only got a little wind and some heavy rains. But the pictures of the storm damage coming from those states have brought back memories of a tornado that we experienced here in my area when I was a kid, and my family and I were caught right in the middle of it.
Triple Studios proudly presents the Midweek Mini, and here's your host, Henry Lee.
It was a Wednesday afternoon in 1984. I was only 12 years old that day, and my family and I had traveled to Newberry, which is the next town over, to do some grocery shopping and probably run other errands. We were in the Winn-Dixie, which used to be on Wilson Road, and the weather took a sudden turn for the worst. We were standing in the checkout line, and I remember the sky first looking really dark, and then there was a yellow hue to the atmosphere just past the huge picture windows at the front of the store. Suddenly, a shopping cart rolled itself across the parking lot, and that's when we noticed the wind was like no other wind we had witnessed before. There was chaos breaking out all over the store as people began to panic. I can remember my mom telling us not to worry, everything would be okay. A man who I believe was the store manager started herding people toward the back of the store where the big freezers were, because that was the safest place for us to wait out the storm. I really don't remember much about being inside the freezer, but I do remember before and after being in the freezer, grown women were crying and praying. And just as soon as all hell had broken loose, all was calm again. There was no power at the grocery store, so we had to leave our full carts and go back home. Now, you have to remember that back then there was no internet or texting, so it took a little while for the news of storm damage to travel, and only bits and pieces were on the news that first night after the storm. But we'd soon find out just how destructive that storm had been. Tom Summer, who was the Newberry County Chief Deputy at the time, was sitting in the parking lot of the Newberry Shopping Center around 5 that afternoon, talking to Officer Paul Whitman of the Police Department of Prosperity. Summer looked towards the west and he saw golf ball-sized hail falling, and then he witnessed a tornado forming over the city. He quickly radioed communications and asked them to sound the warning sirens, but it was almost too late. The tornado made its way from the downtown area to the bypass, leaving destruction in its wake. Summer had tried to get out of his car and run for shelter, but his doors wouldn't even open, so he hunkered down on the floorboard of his car. When he looked outside when it was all over, he saw that an entire tractor trailer had flipped over. Fortunately, the driver of the truck escaped with minor cuts and bruises. Now, I didn't know this until I was doing the research for this episode, but the size of the tornado that hit Newberry that day was enormous. It was 20 blocks in size, so I'm not exaggerating that it was huge. One of the buildings that was destroyed on Main Street was the Wilson Dance Academy. Now, I'm not sure if this is just hearsay or if this was fact, but I heard that there were classes going on at that time, but they were able to get all the kids that were in the classes under the stairwell during that twister. Now, I remember driving by there later when we were looking at the storm damage, and all that was left standing was that stairway. If that tornado had happened a day before or a day after, my little sister would have been on the top floor in her gymnastics class. A car dealership in the area suffered over $530,000 in damage to new and used cars. Many businesses suffered damage from the tornado. Downtown Newberry actually looked like a scene from a war movie. Now, if you know anything about the downtown area of Newberry, you know that it's full of historic homes and churches, and those didn't escape damage either. St. Luke's Episcopal Church was completely destroyed and had to be rebuilt. The Epton Automotive Parts store caved in from the impact of the tornado, killing the owner and manager, which it was just one person. His name was Chris Epton. And like with nearly any tornado, it was odd that one building could be completely leveled to the ground while the others on either side of it were left untouched. There was actually 2 tornadoes that came through Newberry that day. The first tornado that touched down was confirmed an F2. From it, 80 businesses were damaged or destroyed. A church lost its roof and a wall, and was the one that destroyed the dance academy that I mentioned earlier. Its path was 3/4 of a mile wide in some places. It caused the death that I mentioned earlier and 38 injuries. The second tornado was a confirmed F3, and the 2 tornadoes together destroyed 254 houses, 86 businesses, 45 trailers, 68 farm buildings, and 7 large public buildings were destroyed. And that totaled over $14 million in damages. Then that second tornado injured a total of 10 people. It's a rare thing to have an outbreak of tornadoes of that magnitude in our area. Newberry wasn't the only town affected that March day. 22 tornadoes ripped through the South and North Carolina areas that day, killing a total of 57 people, with 15 of those being in South Carolina. Those tornadoes covered a distance of nearly 250 miles. Now, my purpose of this episode was not to say, hey, we had it worse here in the South. We clearly didn't. My intention was just to tell you about my memories of a tragic time here in the area from devastating tornadoes. The fear that they bring lasts much longer than the destruction, and to this day, 37 years later, I'm still terrified when those sirens go off. I mean, you can ask my mom. The first thing I do is start throwing things out of a closet and gathering the pets, and my kids, of course. Well, anyway, when you see the destruction that can come from a tornado firsthand, it really does something to you. And the ones that happened over the last weekend happened in the dead of night, and that's a horror within itself, in my opinion. At least we were in that horrible one, or when we were in that horrible one in 1984, we could see what was going on outside. I'm going to add pictures to our social media pages of the destruction from the 1984 tornadoes, so check them out on our Twitter and Facebook pages. That's all I have today. Have a good week, and don't forget to come back on Friday evening for What the Friday.